The sun dipped low over the sprawling acres of my ranch, casting long shadows across the rolling hills and the sturdy wooden fence that marked the boundary of my property. I'd bought this place 5 years ago, a quiet retreat from the noise of city life. A place where the only sounds were the rustle of wind through the grass and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. The ranch sat on the edge of a small, upscale community governed by an HOA, but my land was exempt, a fact that had never sat well with some of the neighbors. I'd always kept to myself, tending to my horses, maintaining my property, and steering clear of the petty squabbles that seemed to define HOA meetings. But peace, it turned out, was a fragile thing, and it was about to be shattered by a woman named Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. It all began on a crisp autumn afternoon when I noticed a problem with my irrigation system. The pipes feeding my fields were old, and one had sprung a leak, wasting gallons of water and turning a patch of my land into a muddy swamp. After a quick inspection, I decided to shut off the main water valve to my property to prevent further damage while I called a plumber. It was a simple decision, one I'd made before without issue. The valve was on my land, part of my private system, and entirely within my control. I twisted the heavy iron wheel, the flow of water stopped, and I figured that was that. Little did I know, this small act would ignite a firestorm. Karen Mitchell lived in the manicured cul-de-sac just beyond my ranch's boundary. Her house, a gleaming 2-story monument to suburban perfection, was the kind of place where every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention. Karen was infamous in the community, her name whispered in exasperated tones at mailboxes and over backyard fences. She was the type who measured her neighbors' hedges with a ruler, who sent strongly worded emails about unapproved mailbox colors, and who seemed to believe the HOA's bylaws were sacred scripture. But my ranch wasn't part of the HOA, a fact that had always grated on her. She'd made it clear over the years, with pointed glares and passive-aggressive notes slipped under my gate, that she considered my property an eyesore, a blight on her vision of neighborhood perfection. That afternoon, as I stood by the valve wiping dirt from my hands, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Karen's SUV screeched to a stop at the edge of my property, her tires kicking up dust as she slammed on the brakes. She emerged like a storm, her face flushed, her blonde bob swinging with every furious step. She was clutching her phone, already dialing, her voice sharp and accusing as she shouted that I was tampering with the community's water supply. I was stunned. My ranch had its own well, its own system, completely separate from the HOA's utilities. I tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes blazed with righteous indignation, and before I could get a word in, she was on the phone with 911, her voice rising to a pitch that could have shattered glass. The operator's calm responses did little to soothe her. Karen insisted I was committing a crime, that shutting off my water was somehow endangering the entire neighborhood. She demanded immediate action, claiming I was a threat to public safety. I stood there dumbfounded as she paced my driveway, gesturing wildly and throwing out terms like vandalism and trespassing as if I were a criminal on my own land. The absurdity of it all would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Within 20 minutes, a police cruiser rolled up, its lights flashing lazily in the fading daylight. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of boredom and mild curiosity. Karen launched into her tirade again, pointing at me, at the valve, at the muddy patch of ground, as if it were evidence of some grand conspiracy. The officers listened patiently, then turned to me. I explained the situation, my land, my well, my valve, my right to maintain my property. I showed them the property line, marked clearly by the fence, and pointed out the wellhead, which was unmistakably on my side. The officers nodded, their faces unreadable, and asked Karen to clarify her complaint. She sputtered, repeating her claims about the community's water, but the officers weren't buying it. They checked my paperwork, confirmed my property's independence from the HOA system, and told Karen there was no crime here. She was livid, her face turning a shade of red that rivaled the sunset. The officers advised her to take her concerns to the HOA board and drove off, leaving her fuming in my driveway. I thought that would be the end of it. Karen stormed back to her SUV, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits, and peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. I shook my head, chalking it up to another day in the life of dealing with an overzealous neighbor. But as I turned back to my work, a nagging feeling settled in my gut. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. She'd been humiliated, and in her world, that was an unforgivable offense. I didn't know it then, But this was only the beginning of her campaign against me. The next morning, I woke to find a notice taped to my gate, an official-looking letter from the HOA, accusing me of violating bylaws I wasn't even subject to. It demanded I restore the water immediately or face legal action. The audacity was staggering, but it was clear Karen wasn't acting alone. She'd rallied her allies on the HOA board, and they were coming for me. As the days passed, the situation escalated. Karen's SUV became a fixture at the edge of my property, her phone always in hand, snapping photos of my ranch, my equipment, anything she could use to build her case. She started showing up at my gate with other HOA members, all of them glaring across the fence like I was some kind of outlaw. They claimed my actions were lowering property values, that my neglect was a blight on the community. I ignored them, focusing on fixing my irrigation system, but the pressure was mounting. Then came the emails, dozens of them, flooding my inbox with complaints, threats, and demands for compliance. The HOA had launched a full-scale offensive, and Karen was at the helm, her vendetta growing more unhinged by the day. By the end of the week, I found myself at a crossroads. The plumber had repaired the leak and my water was back on, but the HOA's harassment showed no signs of stopping. Karen had taken to patrolling my property line, documenting every move I made, and I could feel the weight of her obsession pressing down on me. I'd always prided myself on keeping the peace, but this was different. This was war. I knew I had to fight back, but I wasn't sure how. The HOA's next move was looming, and I had a sinking feeling it would be bigger than a few angry emails. As I stood on my porch, staring out at the darkening horizon, I realized this battle was far from over. The harassment didn't stop with emails or Karen's relentless patrols. If anything, it intensified. By the following Monday, I noticed a new development. A bright orange notice staked into the ground just beyond my fence, declaring my property a nuisance under some obscure HOA regulation. The notice cited everything from my unauthorized water shutoff to the supposed unsightliness of my barn, which had stood proudly for decades before the HOA even existed. It was clear Karen had spent hours combing through the bylaws, twisting them to fit her narrative. The notice demanded a response within 48 hours, or threatened fines I wasn't even obligated to pay. My ranch wasn't under their jurisdiction, but that didn't seem to matter to Karen or her minions. I decided to take action. I contacted a lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed my deeds, my water rights, and the HOA's charter, confirming what I already knew. My ranch was exempt from their rules. But she warned me that HOAs like this one could be relentless, using their resources to bully residents into submission. Ellen suggested I attend the next HOA meeting to set the record straight, a prospect I dreaded but knew was necessary. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering documents, and steeling myself for what I knew would be a circus. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile building with polished floors and rows of folding chairs. I walked in to find Karen holding court, surrounded by her loyal supporters, all of them whispering and casting glances my way. The room buzzed with tension as I took a seat near the back, my folder of documents in hand. The board president, a man named Gerald who seemed perpetually exhausted by Karen's antics, called the meeting to order. When the topic of my property came up, Karen was the first to speak, her voice dripping with indignation as she recounted the water shutoff incident, painting me as a reckless renegade who threatened the community's well-being. I stood up, calmly presenting my case. I showed the board my property deeds, the well permit, and a letter from the county confirming my water system's independence. I explained the leak, the repair, and the absurdity of the HOA's claims. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the holes in Karen's story, but others, her allies, doubled down, accusing me of disrespecting the community. The room erupted into murmurs and Gerald struggled to maintain order. Karen's face twisted with fury as her narrative unraveled, but she wasn't done. She announced she'd hired a private investigator to monitor my property, claiming she had evidence of further violations. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was clear she was grasping at straws. The meeting ended inconclusively, with Gerald promising to review my documents and consult the HOA's lawyer. I left feeling a mix of relief and unease. I'd made my case, but Karen's obsession was only growing. The next morning, I found my mailbox stuffed with anonymous letters, some calling me a troublemaker, others warning me to comply or else. Karen's campaign had spread, poisoning the community against me. I noticed neighbors avoiding eye contact, their friendly waves replaced by wary glances. My ranch, once a sanctuary, was starting to feel like a battleground. Then came the real escalation. One evening, as I was feeding my horses, I noticed a strange vehicle parked near my gate, a black sedan with tinted windows. It sat there for hours, its occupant watching my every move. I called Ellen, who suspected it was Karen's investigator, digging for anything to justify her crusade. The next day I received a new notice, this one claiming my fence violated some arcane setback rule. It was another baseless attack, but it came with a new threat. The HOA was preparing to file a lawsuit. Ellen assured me we could fight it, but the legal fees would be steep, and the process could drag on for months. As I stood by my fence, staring at the orange notice flapping in the wind, I felt a mix of anger and determination. Karen had underestimated me, but she'd also awakened something I hadn't felt in years, a resolve to protect what was mine. I wasn't just fighting for my ranch. I was fighting for my peace, my freedom, and my right to live without her shadow looming over me. The lawsuit was coming, and with it, a chance to end this once and for all. But as the sun set, casting my ranch in a golden glow, I knew the next battle would test me like never before.